Hello everyone, I'm Mr. Furlong, and today we're talking muscles! We're going to be starting on the muscular system in this video, and a couple of nice things about the muscular system. There's only 3 different kinds of muscles. We have skeletal, smooth, and cardiac. You may recall that from a previous chapter that we've done. Skeletal muscles, of course, attach to bones. Smooth muscles are involuntary, make up many of our organs, and cardiac muscle is only found in the heart. Now we are going to be labeling a bunch of diagrams, and so you have 2 half diagrams that you're going to be putting into your notebook. We're going to put the one that says skeletal muscle structure on top. We're just going to tape the top of that, and underneath it we are going to have the one that says muscle fiber structure. And then below that is the one that's already in your notebook, the myofibril structure. So you'll need to tape this one on first and then tape this one on top. And essentially then what we are going to be doing is going from the larger to a little bit smaller to even smaller parts of the muscle. All the structures that are listed on the screen are ones that you're going to want to label. So we can see the bone, of course, the skeletal muscle is attached to the bone. The tendon attaches the muscle to the bone. Fascia is a type of connective tissue that surrounds each individual muscle. A single muscle is made up of many muscle fascicles. So you can see that muscle fascicle extending out from the muscle there. And muscle fascicles are made up of many muscle fibers. Now the muscle fiber is analogous to a muscle cell. It doesn't look anything like cells that we've been looking at ever before. Muscle cells have a really odd shape, and oftentimes we don't even call them muscle cells. We just refer to them as muscle fibers. Now the muscle fibers are made up of smaller structures called myofibrils, and those myofibrils are made up of filaments or myofilaments. Let's jot down a few definitions here. So we mentioned the fascia. Fascia is connective tissue that covers and separates individual muscles. There are 2 types of filaments. There's actin and myosin. Actin is the thin filament, myosin is the thick. This is what allows our muscles to contract. We'll talk about that in greater detail in another class. Let's zoom in on a single muscle fiber. Remember, that's a muscle cell. And we know that muscle fibers are made up of many myofibrils. Within those myofibrils, we have smaller structures like the sarcoplasmic reticulum that is loaded with mitochondria. There is something called sarcoplasm. It is surrounded by the sarcolemma, and there are various transverse tubules. So let's get into a little focusing on some of these. The sarcoplasmic reticulum stores calcium, and it functions like the endoplasmic reticulum does. The sarcolemma is essentially the cell membrane, so it surrounds each individual muscle fiber. And although I don't have it on here, the sarcoplasm is essentially the cytoplasm of the cell. Of course, there's a bunch of mitochondria in there, which is required in order for the muscles to contract. So now let's zoom in on just one myofibril. So we can see the sarcoplasmic reticulum. The sarcomere is the section of the myofibril that is actually going to be contracting. We can see in kind of the purple color the myosin filaments, those are the thick ones, and then in the bluer ones are the actin or the thin filaments. Now notice how they arrange themselves in nice, neat rows. Now because it lines up nice and neat, we see specific areas of light and dark patterns, and we've identified those. And we've given all those things different names. So, for instance, the Z lines is going to be where the actin molecules are connecting to one another. So we can see a Z line here, a Z line here. Everything between one Z line and the next Z line is considered a sarcomere. Kind of messy there, but that's a sarcomere. The A band is the length of the myosin filament. So that would be essentially from here to here would be the A band. The H zone is the distance between the actin filament. And we can see that in this little space right here. That is part of the H zone. There's another one right here, another H zone. And then the I band is the distance between the myosin. So for instance, that would be, say, this distance here. That is the I band. The neuromuscular junction is the place where the nerve fiber and the muscle fiber meets. Now, in order for a muscle to contract, it needs to have a nerve impulse. So there is a nerve fiber going to a muscle fiber, or in other words, a nerve cell going to a muscle cell. Where these two cells meet is called the neuromuscular junction. Now note, here we see a zoomed in view. This is the nerve cell. There's the folded membrane of the muscle cell. They don't actually touch one another. So there is a synapse or a synaptic cleft that separates the nerve cell from the muscle cell. The motor neuron, kind of cross that out, the motor neuron is the actual name for the nerve cell. The motor end plate is simply the part of the sarcolemma where we have that folding, and then of course we see our myofibril. So the ends of the motor neurons contain synaptic vesicles that have neurotransmitters in them. These are specialized chemicals that can cross that synaptic cleft to get to the muscle fiber. We'll talk more about that later. We know that one nerve cell just doesn't go to one muscle cell. In fact, one nerve cell can actually control many muscle cells or muscle fibers. This is what is known as a motor unit. And this is showing an example of a motor unit where we have our one motor neuron or our nerve cell. And notice how it has multiple branches so that it can attach to multiple skeletal muscle fibers or muscle cells. So that's some basic anatomy of a muscle fiber. We'll take a sweet look at this later on in class, and I'll see you then.